Hello, and welcome to this American History podcast entitled Rebuilding the Union. In our last podcast, we learned about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. We also learned about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and we looked at the Civil War numbers. In this podcast, we are going to take a closer look at Reconstruction, or the time period following the Civil War. In order to complete this assignment, you will need the 17.1 Rebuilding the Union podcast notes in front of you, either in digital form or hard copy. Now that the war is over and Lincoln has been assassinated, the responsibility of rebuilding the nation falls on Vice President Andrew Johnson. Johnson was from Tennessee and had served as a Democrat congressman before becoming vice president. He was pro-union and disliked the wealthy Southern planters. Because he was a Southerner, he also did not support equal rights for African Americans, which offended many Republicans. Under Johnson's Reconstruction Plan, known as Presidential Reconstruction, Confederate states had to ratify the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery and rewriting their own state constitutions before they could re-enter the Union. Johnson spoke repeatedly about treason and how it must be punished, but he very quickly forgave any Confederate soldier who took an oath of loyalty to the Union. Congress felt Johnson was too soft and that Confederates needed to pay for their actions. Johnson's soft reaction to the South was not the only problem Republicans had with his plan. Republicans and African Americans believed they should have the right to own property and the right to vote. Johnson's presidential reconstruction did not ensure this, so Congress created what became known as the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau was created to help newly freed African Americans and poor white Southerners. They provided medicine, food, and clothing for those who needed it. They even tried to set up African Americans with work on plantations that had been abandoned. They created courts to help settle disputes between whites and African Americans. The Freedmen's Bureau also established schools for the newly freed slaves. Unfortunately, most whites and President Johnson were not ready to grant African Americans their full rights, so the Republicans in Congress decided to take control. Because Johnson had been lenient with the South, many Confederate states refused to ratify the 13th Amendment. They even refused to admit that secession had been illegal. Southern states began passing black codes or laws for controlling African Americans and limiting their rights. The black codes granted very few rights to African Americans. They were allowed to get married and pursue a lawsuit in court, but they could not own land, work in certain industries, or serve on a jury. This was another attempt by the South to keep African Americans from receiving their rights and essentially keeping them as slaves. Congress was outraged by the black codes, so in response, they drafted a bill called the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This bill would grant full equality and citizenship to every race and color in the country. Johnson vetoes the bill, further angering the Republicans. Republicans in Congress were able to override the veto, and the bill became law anyways. This set the foundation for the passage of the 14th Amendment, which we talked about in our last podcast. Okay, here's your first section of notes, Reconstruction under Johnson. Pause the video, copy this down onto your notes page, and when you're ready, hit play again. Republicans in the North were shocked when the Southern states refused to accept the 14th Amendment. Republicans in Congress decided it was time to take over Reconstruction. They passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867. This plan later became known as Radical Reconstruction. These acts placed all former Confederate states into military districts. You can see here on the map there are 5 districts. After the war, the Union Army was occupying the Confederate states, which means they had Union soldiers in each state. Each state government had to write a new constitution that would accept the 14th Amendment. Once written, the Constitution was voted on by the citizens of that state. Most of those voting and involved in this process were white Southern Republicans. They became known as scalawags. You can see on the map here also how long it took for some of these states to rejoin the Union. The latest to join were Virginia, Georgia, Mississippi, and Texas. They did not rejoin for 5 years after the war ended. It just shows how resistant they were to make the changes needed in order to rejoin the Union. Okay, here's your second section, Reconstruction Acts of 1867. Pause the video, copy this down, and hit play when you're ready to continue. President Johnson had lost all popularity during this time period. The Republicans in Congress wanted to prevent him from interfering with their Reconstruction agenda. They passed the Tenure of Office Act, which stopped Johnson from removing government officials without Senate approval. This act violated the constitutional provision or allowance that granted the president the right to hire and fire his own cabinet members. Johnson defied this act when he replaced his Secretary of War. As a result, Congress began the impeachment process. Impeachment is outlined in the Constitution that a president who is found to have committed high crimes or misdemeanors can be removed from office. It must pass both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Johnson barely remained in office by 1 vote in the Senate. Okay, here's your next section of notes. Johnson impeached. Go ahead, pause the video, copy this down, and when you're ready, hit play. Once the Reconstruction Acts were passed, this allowed African Americans to gain political freedom, and they wanted to exercise that freedom. Many African Americans from the North moved to the South, hoping to fill appointed or elected office. These men became the backbone of the Republican Party in Southern districts with high populations of African Americans. If you take a look at this picture here, these are the first African American U.S. senators and representatives. They represented 5 Southern states. Okay, last section for your notes, African Americans take office. So just in review of this podcast, we learned about some of the important events and acts that allowed African Americans to gain certain rights and freedoms they did not have before the war. Hope this helps. Have a great day.